Hi, it's John Paul, and a really warm welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad to be recording episode 2 of these career change conversations with Lou Lebentz today. I've known Lou probably for a couple of years, actually on social media, so we've never met in person but recorded a few things together. And Lou's got a very interesting story, I think, as far as the career change. So going to be talking about that and then managing the transition as well from the previous career to becoming a therapist. And then Lou also does so many amazing things now as far as in the world of therapy. And we'll be talking about them too, hopefully, and have some time with that. So thank you so much for coming on, Lou.
Thank you for inviting me. I feel very honoured to be here and hope
Oh,
we can be helpful over the next 40 minutes or so.
lovely. Thank you. So can we just go back to before becoming a therapist and
Yes.
what that was like and what you did before, and also perhaps looking at the sort of moment you decided, if there was a moment, that you wanted to make the change in career.
Yes. Crikey. Okay, let me try and put it in a nutshell if I
Hmm.
can, John Paul. So I did two careers before I found therapy. So when I left school, I first of all went into the rag trade, the fashion industry,
Hmm.
and worked for, among other people, Sir Philip Green, and then worked in the jeans industry. And I got to about 24, 25, and realized it wasn't right for me. And something happened in my life that kind of precipitated a massive change of direction.
Hmm.
And I ended up then going into radio.
Okay.
So I went from rags to radio, and I worked for Capital Radio for a few years and then helped set up Heart 106.2 in London.
Oh, yeah.
And my job was mainly then the marketing and but also the events, so the parties in the park and putting the bands on the stage, doing the road shows, and sometimes being Chris Tarrant's sidekick or competition tester before something would go live on air. So yeah, there's still a few sound bites, or there were, from me on Capital Radio in the old days. That was my claim to fame.
Right. A competition tester, did you say?
Yeah, testing out the competitions before they went live. I was the kind of guinea pig that they
Okay.
used to use for things. Yeah, so it was all good fun. And then I hit 30, the ripe old age of 30, which seems incredibly young now. And I got a call from my mum, who was living up a mountain in Italy at the time, to go and help with my alcoholic stepfather.
Okay.
About 3 years later, and many stories which I won't go into now, I made it back to the UK, and I thought, I can't go back into radio. And I'd already left fashion,
Hmm.
and working and seeing with my stepfather had kind of made me think about health and well-being and wellness. So I actually trained as a personal trainer, and
Gosh.
then I started doing training in hypnotherapy
Hmm.
and something called neuro-linguistic programming.
Yeah.
And I got really much more interested in the mind. And around 31, 32, I thought, no, I'm going to go and train full time in therapy. And I did an addictions therapy qualification at the Priory,
Oh,
which
wow.
was like 6 months of full time study. And I very luckily got a placement at the Roehampton Priory,
Hmm.
and I got a job there after it. So I was about 33 at this point, and then I went into doing a 4 year study in something called contemporary psychotherapy.
Mm.
So I was already working as an addictions therapist, and then I went on to further training and do my full-time training, and that led to my kind of registration as a therapist. And then I just added a lot more things to my belt over the years. So that's how I made the transition, really. I
Okay.
thank my alcoholic stepfather for yeah, some things, not everything, but some things like me getting into the therapy world, really.
Okay. And so you said contemporary psychotherapy, the training was it?
Yeah,
'Cause I think
yeah.
you are UKCP registered because you
I
did a
am.
podcast for them, didn't you? So,
I did.
and it was
Yeah.
and contemporary psychotherapy, is that an integrative course or
Very integrative model. Yeah, and it's quite a it's in the constructivist section of UKCP, and
Mm.
it mixes really neuroscience with gestalt, with hypnotherapy, with kind of person-centered. It's very eclectic, but it's very somatic too.
Okay.
So it's very, and it's contemporary. It's kind of up to date models that it brings in. And I found it really, really helpful for me because I'd already done the addictions therapy training
Yeah.
and then I added in the contemporary training and then just kept adding things like EMDR
Yeah.
and other trauma trainings, etc., and eating disorders trainings over the years.
Okay. And so was it full time that 4 years or was it a part-time course?
No, it was one weekend a month with a
Right.
company called Belief, who are in the East End. It's run by a lady called Pamela Gawler Wright. I self-funded everything, and you know, again, this is another thing for therapy, isn't it? It's not cheap to train
Mhm.
as a therapist.
Yeah.
It's a rather expensive journey. So I used savings when I came back from Italy to fund myself through that first 6 months
Okay.
of priory training, and that gave me an advanced diploma in addictions therapy. And then I got the job there. So then the job, I mean, it wasn't a massive salary, as I'm sure you can imagine, but it enabled me then to fund my psychotherapy training.
How did you find the training with people going through it as well? I know people have very different experiences, but looking back, did was there a lot of change you went through during the training, would you say?
The training now was 2002, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7.
Okay.
So where are we? 2023. So that original training, and you know, even the original addictions therapy training, I look back to those days, I think it was a massive growth period.
Mm.
A massive, I mean, I think the whole of the last 23 years, 22 years
Yeah.
has been, to be fair. And I don't think that that growth ever stops. I think
Hmm.
we're continually evolving. I think there was a massive growth spurt in the training, and what I became aware of what I was unaware of at the time, also then came into my first 10 years as a therapist.
On qualification, what happened then? Did you start a private practice relatively quickly?
No, I didn't really, if I'm honest. So I think I spent from about 2003 to about 2013 at the Priory.
Okay. Yeah.
So, alongside of those 10 years, 7 or 8 I spent on the addiction treatment program at the Priory. So
Mhm.
I was constantly surrounded by other therapists with other modalities, with other belief systems. I was in a very 12-step treatment environment for the first 8 years of my career. I was probably in a very psychodynamic environment in those days. Um, uh, and so it was interesting. It was
Mhm.
an interesting model. And then I spent a couple of years on the general program, and I started to transition into one-to-one work gradually. I think I became a freelancer for a while, a sessional at the Priory.
Okay.
So I worked 3 days a week, maybe there. And then I started to build my practice, private practice. And I think I transitioned fully to private practice 2013, 2014. So, and then rented rooms at the Priory and then rented rooms in the West End, Harley Street for a while, Mayfair, and since COVID, really have just been predominantly totally online on Zoom.
Ah, okay. When you were seeing clients and building your practice, was it people who are experiencing addictions, or were you generally seeing a range of people?
I think for a while I was predominantly known for addictions and then for eating disorders. So I did a lot of addiction
Okay.
and eating disorders. I think the last 10 years, and I'm not sure when I did my first EMDR training, maybe 2011. I think I began to recognize far more how, in my mind, trauma came to the surface, maybe because it came to the surface much more in my own journey,
Hmm.
and I was able to recognize it within myself. That I then began, I believe, to specialize predominantly in what think sits underneath it all,
Yeah.
which is some sort of trauma. Whatever we call trauma is a dysregulated nervous system to some end.
Yeah. So that would come through a lot in your work. I mean, it generally accepted, I suppose, as far as people are experiencing addictions, attachment issues, trauma tend to be at the root of things,
Yeah,
availability as well of substances, behaviours now too. But so it came through a lot, I guess, in the work you were doing with addicts, the
yeah.
trauma side of things, and then you took it from there. Did you? And how did you? So you did an EMDR training.
Yes, yes. Yeah. So I think the EMDR training and then the other add-ons of training that I've done over the years. And I'm just thinking which training I've done because I think I've done so many online or NICAM trainings or PESI trainings or internal family systems
Yeah.
trainings or Janina Fisher's parts models. So I think alongside the EMDR, I've always been kind of adding
Yes.
to looking to expand, I guess, my knowledge and what I offer.
Yes. I mean, that was something we said we sort of met on social media. It was something I really noticed about you from the beginning is well, I think in terms of how generous you are as far as the sort of information you give and the time you put into what you put out there for people as well. Lots of free resources that you put together. I
Yeah.
mean, I just thought it was amazing. It was specifically about trauma, but you would talk about all the different types of trauma treatment as well, where some people I think specialise particularly in say EMDR or something like that. But because I think you put a free resource out there as well, which talks about all the different kinds of trauma
I
treatment,
do.
isn't it? And from that
I
point of view, there are, I guess, different modalities will suit different people, will suit different therapists,
yeah.
and I think that's a great thing. And also, you have, as you say, there's something which comes up too when people ask about the training. They often say, "What sort of training should I do?" Or that they think they might make the wrong decision as far as the type of training. But something that often comes through talking to therapists is the extent to which the development that takes place after the training as well. I mean, from my point of view, the thing that the sort of paradigm, I suppose, that would be most in my mind would be something that I picked up a couple of years after finishing the training. Of course, there are things that I learnt there that still come into my mind and I use, but that's a great thing about the profession as well, isn't it? The way things can develop over time. There's so many modalities, so many opportunities.
Yeah, and I think I agree. I'm totally with you. And if anybody's interested, the 56 Methods to Healing Trauma is still a free ebook that's on the Trauma Thrivers website. And I did that because I suppose I get a little bit upset when I feel that people are doggedly sticking to their one method or model and saying that it can solve everything for everybody.
Yeah.
And that gets my goat a little bit because I don't think everything works for everybody all of the time.
Mm.
I think some things work for some people some of the time,
Yeah.
and we're not everybody's cup of tea. And therapy might not be right for everybody and where they're at that particular moment. So I guess I'm quite eclectic in that different things for me work on different aspects of self, or different synapses, or different cells, or different parts of the body, and everything is heading in the same direction.
Completely.
You know,
I think the thing with trauma as well, it's a word that's been just becoming more and more into public consciousness too, isn't it?
yeah, I mean, it is definitely the new zeitgeist.
Mm.
And I think that there are some great things about it coming into public consciousness. And I think there are some not great things about it. You know, I think sometimes it can be overused a little bit. You know, it's not a trauma that I didn't get blueberries for breakfast this morning.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, but I also think that once somebody recognizes that trauma isn't necessarily a big one-off incident or event, and that a lack of attunement or a lack of emotional support or co-regulation in our childhood, or patterns of neglect are trauma,
Yeah.
or that racism or sexism or homophobia or collective trauma is trauma,
Yeah.
that I think that we can start to recognize how I believe as a society we are all traumatized to a degree,
Yeah.
and what do we do to heal that trauma within ourselves and within each other. And I feel that we do that by creating safety.
Hmm. As you say,
Yeah.
regulating ourselves. I think you put something up about it today. I was reading actually. I remember somebody saying that the greatest gift you can give to a child is a regulated nervous system, like your own
Yeah.
regulated nervous system, really,
Yeah.
and the impact that
Yeah.
that has. Just trauma thrivers, and could you say a bit about that? Because and just now, practically, do you run a private practice as well as doing all these other things that you do, or
I
what's happened
try.
with that? Okay. How do you have the time?
Well, it's quite challenging. So I still do run a private practice. That's my day job. And as you've probably seen, Trauma Thrivers is an online Facebook community and a website to help people at the thriving end of trauma. So that's kind of a collective community, if you like, that anybody can join. And there are free resources, etc. for. So I do that on the side with a colleague of mine, Melanie Curtis, who helps an awful lot. And I've also written something called The Voyage. And The Voyage is an online trauma methodology for healing, really, that at the moment I am training coaches and counselors and clinicians. And last year I trained about 60 American recovery coaches in the Voyage methodology. And this year I'm going to open it up to other coaches and counselors and clinicians who need to know more about trauma. And, you know, just linking back to what you just said, I always say to them in the training, actually, that people really aren't paying us for our knowledge. They're not really paying us for what we've learned or even our wisdom per se. I believe what they're paying us for is how regulated our nervous system feels to them. I believe that the most important thing for us in our training and in our therapy and in our work is that we're prepared to do the work ourselves.
And what that work might be, as you say, there's sort of theoretical modalities. But I remember with my college, they did ask on an application form for the diploma whether you do mindfulness and meditation. I was thinking, I mean, this was years ago when I thought, well, I was a lawyer, so I thought, what relevance would that have to anything? But I can see that it's absolutely about, and there are various different ways to do that, aren't there? But
Yeah,
that connection with mind and body and being able to regulate ourselves so we can
yeah,
contain whatever's happening with clients. And I suppose in some ways model a regulated nervous system. We can certainly make things very complicated, I think, can't we, in terms of all the different modalities and theories. But I think there are some basics. I think definitely what you say, that thing about being able to be present and be regulated and remain in that way and be honest and authentic and all those things are often the thing that is going to be the most helpful thing for clients.
Yeah. And I think that takes time,
Mm.
and it takes an awful lot of practice, because I remember in my early days of being a therapist, just kind of almost being a little bit too much in my head.
Mm.
Is this the right theory? Is this the right, am I doing it right? Am I good enough? Am I getting it wrong? It's a bit like learning to drive a car, isn't it? We're thinking about the gear changes too much and taking our eye off the road. And I think it takes a while to fall into your body and feel comfortable and regulated yourself in sessions so that the focus is in the right place, let's say.
Yeah. And just practically with your with Trauma Thrivers and Voyage as well, how do you work that with the private practice? Do you get your private practice on particular days and then have other days available for doing other things?
I do. So I keep my private practice to 3.5 days a week,
Okay.
and then the other 2.5 days, because it's a 6-day week at the moment for me, is in trying to get the Voyage written and out there.
Okay.
And that's my baby, really, because I feel that in this work and doing this work, and I know that we're both probably keen to say this to people, is I think you have a number of years of being a one-to-one therapist, but I've always done slight things on the side, whether it be social media or freebies or speaking or wanting to do workshops and get out there, because I think there is a lot of power in one-to-one work, but I also think there is a lot to offer in one-to-many.
Yeah.
So my focus now really is on training coaches and counselors more in being these regulated other people and training the trainers, because eventually for me, I really want to take the Voyage out there to the general public. And it's a kind of mission for me, I guess, because all my time in the mental health, and I say that in brackets, sector, I've always seen such a lack of affordable and accessible treatment for people who don't have vast sums of money. And a lot of my money went into my training and my treatment and my journey. And I would rather make something affordable and accessible for people that they can join online. And so eventually that's the aim with the Voyage, John Paul, really, is to try and help get these waiting lists down a little bit that we've got and give people some fundamental skills and psychoeducation and, a community that is accessible to them, that they might have to wait a year or two if they're waiting to see a one-to-one therapist at the moment.
Okay.
So that's what keeps me going. That's what fuels me up for my other 2 days a week, really.
And I know a bit about Voyage. We did something. I was either voice or visibility. But can you say a bit about how the training, how you put it together? Because I think it will be interesting for people as well. As to how you come up with something like that and how you put it together, and then practically as well how you get it out there. Also, if you were looking at voice and visibility too, you are on social media quite a lot, and it might be interesting for people to hear about that. A lot of people coming into the profession, they say, should I have some sort of social media presence? And you certainly do, and I think it works very well for you. So it might be interesting to hear how you find it.
Let me start with voice, if I may, because I think it's quite difficult being a therapist and being out there and being visible in some modalities or in some training. We are very much taught to be a blank screen. And I'm much more relational than that. I think my training is much more contemporary, and I always think about what's going to be most helpful for that person in that moment. And I think voice is really important for me because despite my rag trade and radio and doing a bit on air, when I came into the rehab and the Priory, I found it very difficult to find my voice. So I had intense glossophobia for years and a fear of public speaking.
Right.
So I couldn't speak. And I had to do a lot of work on my own fear of public speaking and putting myself out there and having a voice. And I believe that when we do this training and when we do this work on ourselves, it's really important to share our voice and share what we think out there and do that work in becoming visible. Because I think trauma and lots of therapists I know, we've had our own trauma experience. That's what leads us into the work often is trying to work out our own our own histories. And through that, I think a lot of it is about being seen, being accepted, showing up, sharing our opinions or our voices.
Definitely.
And I
Yeah.
really important work.
And I think for authentically who you are as well, I know that word's used a lot, isn't it? There is, I think, probably a trauma response that some people might have is that we're putting ourselves out there, a sort of full self, maybe a more people-pleasing type. But there's something about being who we are and being out visible. It isn't. Some people absolutely, I think, will respond to trauma by hiding or keeping out of the way, won't they? Some people, perhaps, their response to it is that they shout from the rooftops, but that's also perhaps not truly who they are too. So there's very much something, I think, about being there with what feels right to you and going out to the world with that.
Yeah, and I think really, if I'd thought 10 years ago, would I be able to be as authentic or out there or speak or stand on a stage or do a TEDx? Absolutely not. You know, I remember 20 years ago, stood at the back of the addiction conference, you know, watching Pia Melody in those days, who was a hero, going, oh my God, I would never be able to do that. And fast forward 20 years, and I'm the one stood on the stage at the addiction conference and going, oh my God. So anybody listening to this now that feels like that or that they can't be out there, I promise you that you can.
Oh,
You know, because
yeah.
it's a discovering, isn't it? It's an unfolding. It's a gently coming into our authenticity and our adult as we are working on dissolving the parts of us that keep us back, the parts that say, who are you to have a voice? Who are you to, you know, share, to speak your truth?
Yeah.
You know, who are you not to, as Marianne Williamson would say, you know, is our sharing going to be helpful for whoever it is that's reading it? And if we can think about what we're offering in what it's giving out there, that's often what I think about.
Yeah.
Is how it's going to land with somebody else and if it's going to be helpful. And that's why we get into doing this work too, really, isn't it? Is to make a difference and a change and help to transform not only our own lives vicariously through doing the work that we do, but in helping other people too.
Yes, absolutely. As far as the career, I mean, what would you say are the challenges of it for you? I mean, if you were to compare what life is like now with what life was like then, what would you say? Is it all upside for you? Is it, or are there things that are challenging too? Are there?
There have been numerous challenges, I would say, over the course of a career of being a psychotherapist, and there are now numerous challenges about moving into the field of online training and building a business and trying to be entrepreneurial, dare I say, you know. The ones of being a therapist for me were that it was great at the Priory because I had a team and I was in a company and working with other people. When you work on your own as a therapist, it can be quite solitary work.
Yeah.
And I'm less gregarious, I think, as I get older. But in my 30s and certainly 20s, 30s, and 40s, I love being in teams and working with other people, and the joie de vivre that you get
Mm.
from just being able to share, and I think that's why too that I like kind of programs with an online element or a community or being with other people, because I do think as human beings we do better in a community or even a
Yeah.
supervision group or a team where we've got other therapists that we can speak to if we're a one-to-one lone practitioner.
Yeah, and I think as well,
Yeah,
if you're looking at connecting that with a journey with trauma as well, one of the effects that trauma can have is certainly adversely affecting trust of self, but also trust of others. So to be
yes,
part of communities is very healing from that point of view, isn't it? Finding out that you
yeah,
can choose to trust people and that you can feel safe around
yeah,
people, and that's one of the wonderful things. Online can be a good way into that, can't it? It's
absolutely.
because you can connect with people all over the world, and also perhaps for some people it's not quite as confronting as a face-to-face experience, so it's a way of being around others, sharing, and therefore re-establishing that trust in other, or establishing that trust in other human
Yeah,
beings, which is part of the
yeah.
journey for people, isn't it? Yeah.
Exactly,
Mm.
exactly. And I think, the other thing is you need to overcome the mindset of working for companies, and particularly big companies that were quite solid. It was the monthly paycheck and it
Yeah.
was guaranteed. And to a certain, part of us, that feels like it's security.
Hmm.
I mean, whether it's actually security, getting a paycheck at the end of the month, or whether there's much more security for me now in knowing that I'm in charge of my own destiny and my own diary and my own income.
Yeah.
And that really, as a psychotherapist, it falls or it ends with me,
Hmm.
because I am my own marketeer and I am my own accounts person,
Yeah.
and I decide on really whether I succeed or fail.
Hmm.
So there is much more freedom in that, but you don't get your holiday paid for.
Right.
And if you're unwell, you don't get that either. So you do have to be a little bit entrepreneurial in spirit, I think, too.
Hmm. And how do you manage it from a when we're talking about a regulated nervous system as well? I suppose some of those things that we're talking about, the new things that you're doing, are very exciting. So there is
Yes.
that, isn't it? But there's also the Voyage job provides a sort of container, doesn't it? That there's
Yeah.
people around you, there are other people's support, there's other
Yeah.
people's input. But doing all this, do you talk to other people about how to move forward? If you're looking for that sort of entrepreneurial thing, or are they ideas that generally come from you?
So I think the program ideas has come from me because I'm quite creative, and maybe that's my marketing design kind of background.
Yeah.
But I definitely have always had my own therapy or coaching
Okay.
or other people around me that can help to support, because I don't think you can do any of it alone.
Mm. So you have a coach at the moment.
Yeah,
Oh, great.
yeah,
Okay, and you've
yeah.
maintained a coach all the way through.
I've maintained either a coach or a therapist or
Fantastic.
some degree of support
Okay.
all the way through.
Mm.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah,
Just
yeah.
just generally, I mean, sort of bringing things to an end, but what advice would you give anybody coming into the profession or going through their training at the moment? Is there any advice you give?
The first thing that comes up for me is do your own work.
Hmm.
So and make it a practice, an ongoing practice, I think,
Yeah.
of that self-reflection and that coming in and that being your own regulated nervous system.
Hmm.
I think that's really, really important, because I think unless we're in ventral vagal, which if you haven't done Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory or worked with Deb Dana, I highly recommend it.
Hmm.
It really helps to kind of understand stuff around the nervous system. I think that's the most important thing to do as a therapist, if I'm honest.
Yeah, and are there particular things that you do on a sort of daily basis as part of your routine that will do that for you?
Yeah, well, meditation or mindfulness in the morning,
Okay,
being out in nature does it for
me
me.
too.
I'm very lucky. I've got a dog who just is adorable, and even stroking and having him around in my life is helpful. Friendships, community, fun,
Yeah,
like laughter, some practice where you just have a bit of joy in your life, because sometimes I'm going to be honest, whether you've got a caseload of 15 or 20, or I mean, I've never gone over 25 clients a week, nor could I ever, and that was pretty much when I was full time, one to one. There has to be so much self-care in that,
yeah,
you know, to retain yourself, because it's not easy work, but the work that we do is also life-changing for us because of the post-traumatic growth that we get, because of the vicarious kind of healing that we get through it too. But it's, yeah, come back to self and always do the work.
yeah. So interesting. I mean, just I was asked by somebody to say what would you recommend as far as podcasts for people with therapists going through the training, and I've said actually, from an apps point of view, something like Insight Timer, because it's a mindfulness and meditation one. So really, it's that our connection between our mind and our body, what our body's telling us, all those things, I think for all human beings could be the most important messages. And then, of course, other people's input and ideas. But certainly, as you say, listening to yourself, knowing yourself, being able to regulate ourselves in situations, why we're feeling what
Yeah,
we're feeling, what that's telling us about the situation we're in or who we're with, is
yeah.
is so important. So,
And being able to process our own stuff, able to process our own dysregulation, being able to allow our own feelings up and be really in touch with our somatic system, and also being very gentle with our wounded and our adapted parts.
yeah, certainly,
They're going to get triggered.
absolutely. Oh, Lou, it's just been amazing. Thank you so much. I think so much of what you said is going to be so helpful for people. It's been helpful for me. So,
Good.
thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
In terms of getting in contact with you, I mean, I will on the video and also the podcast put some social media links if you want to do that. But
Yeah.
anything you would say if people want to find out about the course or trauma
Yeah.
therapy?
Yeah, traumathrivers.com is the main Trauma Thrivers website, and there's links to the Facebook group and everything there. In fact, there might be the podcast too that we did together on the Trauma Thrivers
Yeah.
website. The Voyage and the training, which I'm launching in October, is on the voyageacademy.com.
Okay.
So that's for coaches, counselors, clinicians that need or want a methodology to work with trauma
Okay.
and how to work with it.
Great.
So,
So if anybody listening is interested in that, please go and take a look. And you're also on social media as well, aren't you? The
yeah,
LinkedIn,
yeah.
Facebook, and Instagram as well. So
Instagram.
I'll put some links to those things under the
Brilliant.
amazing.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thanks again. And
Thank you.
yes, hopefully we get to meet up at some point,
Yeah, wouldn't that be
wouldn't
lovely?
it?
Yeah, we'll do it. We'll make it happen.
We will. All right.
All
Thanks.